Evening panel. My question to you tonight is, it seems like the lines between PR and journalism are becoming increasingly blurred, particularly when it comes to political reporting. How do we make sure that we're holding these media outlets to account for their journalistic standards and the words that they share?
Let's start with you, John Safran, because in a sense we can talk about the breathtakingly dark arts of PR that you've uncovered in your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
My book, I looked into Philip Morris, who were claiming that they're the Marlboro people, and they were claiming that they were shutting down as a cigarette company, and they were going to relaunch as a health enterprise, and they were going to try to get the 1 billion smokers, including their own customers, off cigarettes. And so at first I thought, maybe this is like the fall of the Berlin Wall or the end of apartheid or something, and it's actually going to happen. And then I snooped around a bit, and you wouldn't believe it. You can't take the makers of Marlboro cigarettes on face value. And what they were doing is they were... the reason they were doing this is because in Europe, the European Parliament banned menthol cigarettes all across Europe last year. So you can't make them, you can't sell them, and it was going to be the first step of banning all cigarettes across Europe. So Philip Morris, it was the beginning of the end. And so they came up with this strategy of, we're going to introduce this new product, and it's not a cigarette, it's a heat stick. And then I've actually got it. I think I got it.
Ah, you've got it. It's got a funny name. It's called an IQOS or something.
How do I not have this?
Is it at the back?
That was the one thing I had to bring. Anyway, it's... You shove
the cigarette into this stick and it heats up the tobacco.
But you look at this thing that they're saying isn't a cigarette, is a heat stick, and it's tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling nicotine and tobacco into your lungs.
That's a cigarette.
And it's and you say, well, why is that not a cigarette? And they say, oh, because it's a heat stick.
And because it doesn't burn.
Yeah, they've got their own little things around the edges that claim it's not a cigarette, and but it worked. So over Europe now, you cannot buy menthol cigarettes, but you can buy menthol tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling tobacco and nicotine into your lungs. And it just worked. I couldn't believe it. So it just goes to show how you've got to be on your toes. But, and I guess if you're talking about reporting, no one reported on this because it seems like a really un-zeitgeist issue, the whole thing about cigarettes. It seems like a 1970s issue, and it's like, John, if you're going to report on it, you should grow sideburns and wear flares or whatever, because what an out-of-date issue. And so that's why I think lots of the media didn't cover it. But if you've got cells growing in your body, taking over, giving you cancer, it's very zeitgeist for that, very zeitgeist for the health system. And still in 2021, 52 million people die of everything all over the world. 8 million of those are cigarette related. So it couldn't be more zeitgeist, but journalists dropped the ball, except for... just because it didn't seem like it's kind of a cool, topical kind of thing. It seemed like a dated thing.
Let me go to you, Tony, because this question really is perfect for the incredibly media-managed world of sport as well, where politeness or playing the game is access. And crossing that line means, the end of access, and access is everything in that particular world. How do you respond to the question?
Oh, it's an interesting one. I think sport... Well, actually, I've got an interesting take on this, especially around Indigenous players. Clearly, being a former one, not a former Indigenous person, still can confirm, former player. Even some of the words that are used around describing Indigenous players. So, a player will be magical, freakish. It's unbelievable the way that Eddie Betts kicked that goal. It's uncanny. It's like what we're actually doing there, very, very subtly, is we're discounting the 10,000 hours of mastery. We're very subtly getting into the general discourse that Eddie Betts through no training, just picked up a ball and magically can kick a goal from anywhere. No, we're discounting that. And then when you talk about the way a lot of, I guess, non-Indigenous players are reported on, it's hardworking, tough, reliable, courageous. So even words like that it can very quickly change the way a conversation goes. And then when you talk about access, it's quite funny. We beg for players to be themselves, and then the second they are themselves, we're like, oh no, showing too much personality. He's just got to, 1 week at a time. It's all that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting world, the sports reporting world. Yeah.
Where do you see the dark world of PR, Virginia, intruding into the kind of reporting you want to see?
Well, I think that the extraordinary thing about words generally is, of course, that it's our main form of communication, but it's also our primary means of obfuscation. Like they can work for good and evil, right? And
they do both very well.
They really do. And if you have somebody who's in a position of power who is not a good person but is great with words, then you're in the beginning of a nightmarish hellscape. Like, that's the beginning of a dystopian future. But I think there is also an extraordinary capacity for words, particularly at this moment when we're so isolated, for words to carry extraordinary messages of hope, for words to actually make us feel incredibly connected when we can't be literally connected. So I'm not throwing words out, Virginia. I think that's my final take on that.
Yeah,
I'm pro-words.
I think that's a fairly good take.
Yeah, pro-words if carefully used. Yeah.